In the early 1870s, something was going terribly wrong along the prairie roads of southeastern Kansas. In Labette and Montgomery counties, people began to disappear. Not criminals, not drifters, but lone travelers, merchants transporting goods, and settlers heading west in search of land and opportunity. They vanished on dusty roads without witnesses, without signs of struggle, and without a trace. Again and again, authorities inspected a small roadside store and inn near Cherryvale, run by a family known as the Benders. They were German immigrants, operating a modest business about 50 miles north of the Oklahoma border. Their cabin, built around 1870, stood on an isolated plot of land, with the nearest neighbors several miles away in any direction. The household consisted of 4 people. William Bender and his wife, both in their 60s, spoke little English and had heavy accents. Living with them were 2 younger adults in their 20s, Thomas Bender and a woman named Johanna, who went by Kate. But even this basic family structure was unclear. Some sources claimed the younger pair were the Benders' children. Others said they were husband and wife. Thomas was sometimes referred to as John Gebhardt. Some locals believed only the 2 women were actually related. The confusion surrounding their names and relationships later raised an unsettling question. Were the Benders hiding their true identities from the very beginning? Despite repeated inspections, nothing ever seemed out of place. The family appeared harmless, quiet frontier shopkeepers living an unremarkable life on the edge of civilization. The male members of the Bender household were large, rough-looking men, exactly what one would expect to see on the American frontier. Kate, however, was described in wildly different ways. Some witnesses remembered her as large, masculine, and red-faced. Others described her as attractive, well-built, and strikingly confident. Most agreed on her rosy complexion and possibly red hair, a feature that, in the 19th century, was often associated with witchcraft and the evil eye. The cabin itself measured roughly 16 by 20 feet and was divided in 2 by a heavy cloth curtain. The front half served as a general store, selling tobacco, crackers, sardines, candles, gunpowder, and shot, basic supplies for anyone crossing the prairie. The air smelled of kerosene and tobacco. Travelers could also get a hot meal, a rare comfort on Kansas roads, where settlements were often separated by dozens of miles. The Benders mostly kept to themselves, but attended church and town meetings, blending in easily with the rural community. Kate stood apart. She openly claimed to be a psychic medium, gave public lectures on spiritualism, and placed advertisements in local newspapers promising to heal disease, cure blindness, seizures, and deafness. Desperate people were willing to travel miles for hope. This detail would later prove essential to understanding how the victims were selected. By 1873, concern in Labette County had turned into fear. The missing were not random. They were respectable people, men with money, families, and clear destinations. In March of that year, Dr. William York of Onion Creek in Montgomery County set out to search for a man named Laufer and his infant daughter. The father and child had passed through the area the previous winter and were last seen heading toward Cherryvale. Dr. York never returned. This disappearance changed everything. York belonged to a powerful and well-connected family, and his vanishing could not be ignored. In April, his brother, Colonel A.M. York, a Civil War veteran, organized a search party of 50 armed men. They methodically combed the countryside, stopping repeatedly at the Bender cabin, a convenient and familiar waypoint. At one point, a desperate Colonel York asked Kate to use her claimed psychic abilities to locate his brother. Kate conducted a séance and said the spirits revealed nothing. No one suspected that she already knew exactly where Dr. York lay buried, just a few feet beneath the soil behind the cabin. Just days after the search party's visit, a traveler stopped at the Bender property and found it deserted. The doors swung open in the wind. The family wagon was gone. The horses were gone. Everything of value had vanished. A calf left in its pen had died of thirst and starvation, a clear sign of a rushed, panicked escape. Authorities from Cherryvale were notified and immediately went to investigate. At first glance, the interior looked mostly undisturbed. Goods still lined the shelves. Furniture stood where it always had. Only clothing, bedding, and personal belongings were missing, the kinds of items someone would grab in a hurry. Then the sheriff ordered a thorough search. A deputy noticed a strange odor coming from the back of the cabin. Near the table where travelers were served meals, they found a crude trap door beneath the floorboards, fitted with iron hinges. When it was opened, the room filled with a sickly, sweet stench of decomposition. Below was a pit nearly 7 feet deep. Its walls and earthen floor were soaked in dark, dried blood. Far too much blood for a single victim. Outside, attention turned to the garden. The soil had been neatly tilled, except for one patch that sagged unnaturally. The first body pulled from the ground was Dr. William York. Weeks had passed, and the body was badly decomposed, but identification was possible through his clothing and a pocket watch. The back of his skull had been crushed by a powerful blow. His throat was cut so deeply it nearly severed his head from his body. Before nightfall, 7 more bodies were unearthed. The following day, by torchlight and before hundreds of horrified townspeople, a 9th body was recovered. Most of the victims were decomposed beyond recognition and could only be identified by fragments of clothing, boots, or personal items. Among the dead were W.F. McCrotty of Cedarville, a hardware merchant whose wallet was found empty, despite the fact that he was known to be carrying a large sum of cash. D. Brown, also of Cedarville. Henry F. McKenzie of Hamilton County, Indiana, a settler rumored to be carrying $2,600 to purchase land. Mr. Laffer and his infant daughter from Independence, the very people Dr. York had gone looking for. 2 unidentified men. A child, believed to be an 8-year-old girl, buried alone, with no clear indication of who she had been traveling with. Another body, found a month earlier in Drum Creek, several miles from the cabin, was also attributed to the Benders. Every adult victim had suffered the same injuries: a crushed skull and a slashed throat. The infant Laffer had no visible wounds. She had been buried alive and suffocated in the soil beside her dead father. Based on the condition of the bodies, the nature of the wounds, and the layout of the cabin, investigators reconstructed a chilling method of murder. The dining table stood in a narrow alcove formed by heavy cloth partitions on both sides. The curtains were stretched tightly from ceiling to floor, creating the illusion of a private dining space for guests. The partitions were placed so close to the chairs that when someone sat upright, the back of their head pressed visibly against the fabric. Behind those curtains, in the dark rear section of the cabin, the Bender men waited, armed with heavy stone hammers. Kate and the older woman distracted the guest with conversation, sometimes offering whiskey, slowly lowering their guard. At the right moment, when the victim leaned forward, relaxed, or simply sat still, the outline of their head became clearly visible through the thin cloth. One sudden, powerful blow to the back of the skull. No warning, no scream, no chance to fight back. The body was immediately dropped through the trapdoor into the pit below, where the throat was cut to ensure death and allow the blood to drain into the soil. These murders took place in broad daylight, during meals, the moment when travelers felt safest. After dark, the bodies were carried out the back door and buried in the garden, where regular plowing concealed the graves. This reconstruction was partially confirmed by a man named Mr. Wetzel from Independence. Suffering from severe neuralgia, Wetzel had answered one of Kate's newspaper advertisements and traveled with a friend, Mr. Gordon, hoping for treatment. Kate examined him carefully, asked detailed questions about his symptoms, and confidently promised a permanent cure. Before beginning the treatment, she invited both men to stay for dinner. They were seated at the now infamous table inside the narrow alcove between the curtains. But for reasons neither man could later fully explain, instinct, discomfort, or pure chance, they stood up almost immediately and asked to eat instead at the counter in the front of the store. Kate's demeanor changed instantly. Her friendly, professional manner vanished. She became sharp, rude, and openly hostile. At the same time, Wetzel and Gordon noticed the two Bender men stepping out from behind the curtains in the rear of the cabin, directly from the space where the guests had just been sitting. Alarmed, the men paid quickly, refused any treatment, and left despite Kate's attempts to stop them. Later, after reading about the discovered bodies, they realized the truth. Their refusal to sit at that table had saved their lives. Their account became the only direct eyewitness confirmation of how the murders were carried out. When news of the murders spread through Labette County, the reaction was explosive. Fear turned into rage. People who had lived near the Bender cabin for years, who had shopped there, attended church with the family, and exchanged polite greetings, now understood that they had been living just feet away from a mass grave. Vigilante committees quickly formed. Their first target was a German immigrant named Brockman, a man who had briefly been a business associate of Old Man Bender several years earlier. The mob seized him, threw a rope around his neck, and demanded a confession. When Brockman swore that he knew nothing, that he had long since cut ties with the Benders, they hanged him from a tree. At the last moment, they cut him down. They demanded answers again. When he had none to give, they hanged him a second time, and then a third. Only the intervention of calmer voices finally stopped the lynching. Brockman was left lying on the ground, barely conscious, likely suffering injuries that would affect him for the rest of his life. The hunt for the Bender family intensified. Kansas Governor Thomas Osborne personally offered a reward of $2,000, an enormous sum, for the capture of each family member. Telegrams were sent across the country. Descriptions were distributed to law enforcement from Missouri to California. Yet no one was ever officially arrested or brought to trial. One investigation, based on witness statements and railroad records, suggested a carefully planned escape. The Benders reportedly boarded a train from Thayer to Chanute. There, John, or Thomas, and Kate split off and took a Missouri, Kansas, Texas railroad train south toward the Red River and Indian Territory. In those regions, federal law was weak and identities were easy to erase. The older Benders likely traveled separately and reunited with them near the border. From there, the family supposedly moved through Texas and New Mexico, disappearing among settlers, outlaws, and drifters. But the people of Labette County told a very different story. In 1910, nearly 40 years later, San Francisco police captain Thomas S. Duke researched the case for his book Famous Criminal Cases of America. Seeking clarity, he wrote to law enforcement officials in Cherryvale and Independence, asking what truly happened to the Benders. Cherryvale Police Chief J.N. Kramer replied, "A vigilance committee was organized to search for the Benders. Not long afterward, Old Man Bender's wagon was found beside the road, riddled with bullets. You may draw your own conclusions." The response from Independence Police Chief D.M. Van Cleve was even more direct. "I have lived here for 40 years, and in my firm belief, they never went far. Those who know simply smile when they hear reports that the Benders were seen elsewhere." Both letters carried the same unspoken message: stop searching. They did not escape. Despite persistent rumors that the Benders had been quietly executed, alleged members of the family were repeatedly arrested across the United States in the decades that followed. Each time, newspapers exploded with sensational headlines. Each time, the claims collapsed. The most notable case occurred in 1890, 17 years after the murders. Two women were arrested in Michigan and confidently identified by witnesses as Ma and Kate Bender. They were transported under guard to Kansas. Their attorney, however, produced sworn affidavits proving the women were Almira Griffith and Sarah E. Davis, two unrelated individuals who had lived continuously in Michigan from 1870 to 1874. They were released with apologies. The true fate of the Bender family remains unknown. Did they escape south through Indian Territory, Texas, and New Mexico? Or were they quietly hunted down and killed by vigilantes on a lonely Kansas road? Both versions persist side by side.